Hello and welcome to the workshop for a somewhat nerdy episode on the MAT49. Now, despite appearances, this was not my first SMG designed by Duplo. This was, in fact, the standard French SMG from 1949 all the way up to 1979, where it was replaced in function by the FAMAS as it became available. Now, this will be, as I said, somewhat nerdy. There's lots of technical details, but there is some shooting right at the end. So if that's all you're interested in, go ahead, fast forward and jump to the end and you will see what you're looking for. Now, the story of this, maybe do a quick historical rundown first, begins obviously immediately post World War II. Now, France is awash with SMGs from the occupying force and the Allies. So there is an inordinate number of Stens around, so many that the French even made a small run of 8,000 themselves under the name of Norme and Rhône. Then there were, of course, Thompsons, there were M3 grease guns, and there were also quite a number of MP40s still washing around, so they didn't go to waste, they were recycled through the system. But of course, this is immediately post-war. It's a country that's restructuring, refining its identity, and of course, they would like a domestic design. It's perfectly understandable. Now, they already have a domestic design. Of course, they have the MAS-38, which was adopted just pre-war, but it doesn't really correspond to the modern SMG that has come out from World War II, the stamped, cheap, red, easy to produce SMGs. They do try to upgrade it. They try to upgrade it to 9mm. This due to a decree on the 20th of July 1946 that the standard caliber for pistols and SMGs will be 9mm. They try that. They do it. They also try and implement a folding stock on it, which is quite difficult because the MAS-38 recoil system partly goes into the stock. I've seen photos of prototypes. They managed it. How? I don't know why. I think they probably used a piston system similar to in the what's currently being used in FM2429. And then they also tried to modernize the receiver to use stampings, use lighter alloys, even so far as to try and experiment with polymers. However, none of that really worked. Technically it was possible, but the outcome would be something that was more expensive than starting from scratch. So that's what they did. So a decision taken to start from the ground up. The requirements are published in October of 1946. Actually, they're pretty straightforward. It should be in 9mm. It should have a folding or collapsible stock. The magazine should be able to be folded under the barrel. It should require the minimum amount of machining operations, milling, drilling, and so forth, and make extensive use of stampings. And the final requirement is that it is put together using mostly welding techniques. So that is then published. Available for all submissions, and actually this is one of the rare cases where the civilian arms industry made a genuine attempt to get a contract. Previously the French industry learned the hard way there was no glory or riches to be gained from entering the French military trials, but this one attracted 3 major players, 2 of which Ian has done excellent videos on already. The first one is the Hotchkiss Universal, or what's it called? CHM2. The very foldy thing, which was interesting, trialed, but ultimately too expensive, too complicated. Then there is the other extremely foldy thing, the MGD, Merlin, Guérin, and Dauphiné, which was the acronym for the 3 inventors, which is a tiny little folding thing with a clockwork mainspring, that also involved a redesign using a pneumatic piston instead of the clockwork, but ultimately that was also not really reliable. And the third was an SMG submitted by Gevarm, which was the sort of gun-making division of Gévelo, which was the major munitions manufacturer in France. And that got a couple of contracts for police, bodyguard kind of units in Paris, but didn't interest the military. So that left the big guns, who were working, of course, in the background, Châtellerault, Saint-Étienne and Tulle. So the three national arsenals go ahead with their own independent lines of prototypes, each with their particular interpretation of the requirements. And ultimately, that's the designs submitted by Saint-Étienne and Tulle, which are judged the most promising. They each produce a small series of their final iterations, and those are put to field trials. And the feedback from the troops overwhelmingly comes back in favour of the Tulle design. Now, it's not quite as we see here, as is often the case. Basically, at that stage, it does not have a cooling shroud. The folding stock, well, it's a folding stock rather than a telescoping stock, wooden. The grip safety is not there, it's a different safety system, and since it's a decision by a committee, these features are cherry-picked from the other prototypes. Since it's all within the national arsenal system, there's no IP problems, not that they would care anyway. But the the sheet stamping, construction, welding, extensive use of welding, the straight blowback system, all that essentially is present and remains unchanged. So the result is what we see here, more or less. Yeah, on the 20th of May 1949, it's approved and put into production. So what do we have? Well, essentially we have exactly what the brief asked for. We've got a SMG of extremely simple construction, using pretty much exclusively stamped sheet steel, bent and welded together. You can see a nice seam here going all the way up. Spot welding as well is heavily used, a shroud here, and basically the most heavily machined parts are, of course, the barrel and the bolt, you'll see in a second. So this operates, it's an open bolt, so in this case you can see it's empty, and when you pull the trigger, the bolt goes forward, strips around, chambers and fires. The firing pin is fixed, and we just have the extractor you can see here, which pivots. Now the model you see here is actually a second pattern, and you can tell that quite easily due to the shape of this socket here at the back. Initially it was actually square, so without this angled surface on the sides, but it was found to be a weak spot, and after consulting some handy German experts in the field of sheet stamping, they came up with an improved design, so it's actually a little bit deeper than the original, and it has these sloped surfaces, and that eliminated any problems. Now, as a consequence of that, the first pattern is sometimes known as the short receiver pattern because of the shorter cube. It also means that the recoil spring guide rod is also 5mm shorter. Now, another upgrade for the second pattern is to the trigger and safety mechanism, which I'll show you a bit later. Now, this one has actually escaped that upgrade. The ones that do have a little 5-pointed star visible on the exposed part of the trigger. This one missed it, which is convenient for my little explanation of how the safety works. Now, there is also a third pattern in which they really cut down on the manufacturing steps. So gone are separate grips. There's simply textured in the stamping. We no longer have this sort of fine fitting of the trunnion, it's just simply welded on. The bolt knob here becomes a simple hook, no longer a nice knurled piece, or sometimes you see it with circumferential rings machined in. So it's just a hook, and they also simplify significantly the assembly of the rear sight, which isn't complicated to start with, but savings could be made, and they did. Now, in terms of magazines, the standard is a 32 round double stack. There also exists a so-called Sahara pattern magazine, which is a 20 round single stack, with the theory of the more space you have around the stack, the more sand can build up before it causes any stoppages. So you're a young thrusting recruit or a steely-eyed veteran and you get given this brand new SMG. What else do you get with it? Well, you get given this action pack here, entitled Collection individuelle complète pour le pistolet mitrailleur modèle 1949. And inside this heavily waxed box there would be a sling, which has two sling swivels, front and rear, and they attach here on the muzzle. And then you have the choice at the rear. There's a little ring here on the bottom of the grip. You could attach it to the stock, and that reminds me that I forgot one more modification between the first and second model, and that is the addition of this second crossbar here, which is another sling attachment point. You see it sometimes in period photographs that the rear sling swivel on the sling is removed and they just loop the sling around the sling bars there. Otherwise, what do we have in here? We have a technical guide, which advises on a quick rundown of how it works, the component parts, and how best to use it in various positions. And then there is a little pouch for maintenance. So in here, this is from 1959, we have a 2-component brass cleaning rod, still with the original 100% genuine patina. And then we have an oil bottle. These are later changed to plastic, and a loading tool. Pretty basic loading tool, and you need it because with 32 cartridges and double stack, the magazine gets stiff very, very quickly, and basic push down, which I still use. Very, very useful. In terms of mag pouches, the first model is leather, which is pretty much an enlarged version of this, longer, wider, and holds 2 magazines. Basically the same one as used in the MAT49, and you'd get 2 of those. And then when you move away from leather, we get these canvas pouches, which hold 5 magazines. I've only got 3, sadly, desperately looking for more. And these, I've seen them worn singly or 2. You can wear them on your webbing belt on the hips like this. I've also seen them making use of the straps, which is a sort of, you have to build yourself. There's a strap or part of a strap in each side magazine slot, and there is a shoulder piece which is tucked in to the flap here, which you link up with the 2 side portions, and that allows you to carry it on the shoulder. And I've also seen it shortened and over the neck, so it's like a chest piece in front like this. And also there is a big strap which you can carry it like a bag. I'm guessing when these are fully loaded, it gets quite heavy, so you can sling them around like this. Now there is also a blank firing adapter for using plastic blank cartridges, and that fits over the muzzle. There's a threaded collar, which is in 2 parts, a clamshell, and a cap then that unites the 2 parts. Alright, I made no apology for going full nerd now. Just going to make a little disassembly and have a look at the innards. Now I've removed the stock, which incidentally I have read made an excellent splint in the field. You can see that, you could bind that to a limb quite nicely. Anyway, disassembly is very simple. You just need to put the magazine guide here at an angle. If you put it in functional mode, it locks out the disassembly button here. It just pushes up against the back. So you need it slightly forward, and then you can push it in and separate the 2 parts. And here is the breech block, which is as simple as you could possibly imagine. And here's the captive recoil spring on its guide, and that sits in there and travels backwards and forwards along it. Now notice that the actual breech face is proud of the main body, and that's because it has to span this funnel-shaped area in front of the chamber's in there. So if we get our dummy, you can see it sits in there. And this has two functions. Firstly, it means you can have a wide variation in the presentation of the cartridge, and it will be shoved in, so good for reliability. And secondly, it provides a pressure relief area should you get premature detonation before fully chambering. That's why there's this hole here that goes all the way through, so that any debris will go out sideways rather than probably in your mate's face next to you. Right, so there's nothing much to say about the rest up here. And you've got a dust cover which will open either when you're firing from the bolt back, or if you're cocking the action, it'll flip open in either case. Now, what I really want to show you is the safety, because it's a little bit obscure as to how it actually works. Now, as I said before, this is the first pattern of the mechanism, and essentially there are two linkages. One is the trigger mechanism and the other one is the safety. So I can show you the trigger mechanism. It's very easy to remove. What I need to do is remove this pin here. I can do that just by pressing down, and also pressing down on the safety, and then I can just slip it out. And here we have the trigger mechanism. It's very unusual in that it's essentially a cantilever construction. So the hook here hooks into that cross pin you can see there. And there's another pin just below it. You just see in the gunk down there. And that is what this spring here at the bottom pushes against. So it's essentially just suspended like so. And the cross pin up here prevents it from flipping upwards. Some of you may already see a problem with that. Since we have it here, we can see also the actual paddle assembly for the safety. Now this has two functions. So if I put this, well, you can see here we have at the bottom. You can see this element moving down at the bottom there. Down there. That pushes against this spur at the back of the trigger. So that means when you try and press the trigger without the grip safety pulled, the trigger will butt against the spur here on the back of the lever, and it'll stop lowering of the sear. And when the bolt is forward, if you don't press on the safety, it butts against the breech block forward, so you don't get accidental hooking of the bolt should you snag on something. So basically a drop safety when the bolt is forward, so you don't accidentally pull it back sufficiently enough that it strips the ground off and fires. And you can see this one's had a few knocks, so this obviously did happen. Now, despite appearances, because you see there's a straight surface at the back, the function of this is not to retain the bolt in a rear position. So when it's lined up correctly, actually, I'll put it back together and then everything lines up properly. So there we go, everything's back in position. Notice there's a cutout here in the pin, and that's what the top of the trigger sits in and retains the pin in place, so it won't. You can't push it out should you for any reason remove the stock. Otherwise it's retained in place by the two limbs of the stock here. Anyway, this paddle here, as I was saying, this part of the safety, so it only retains the bolt in a forward position. It doesn't hold it back in the rear position should for any reason the sear drop inadvertently. And in fact, you can see that the underside here, this is the sear surface.
and you can see on either side, what concerns us is on this side, it's actually a curved surface that curves from the bottom of the notch up towards this upper surface. So it's going to force this paddle down and out of the way. Now this, the way this is constructed, poses the following problem. Bolt is cocked, which will load our mag with one dummy. So imagine you're walking around like this, which would be perfectly viable, or it's propped up against a wall or on a surface, and for some reason you get a hard tap on the pistol grip, or maybe between here, for example. What could happen is that. Notice I was not holding the safety. So you chamber around and of course it would go off because it's open bolt. That is a problem. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, let's drop it again, because of the way the trigger is set up. So what I basically did is just pull down. Because the trigger is not pinned here at the back, you can pull the entire Sear down, and as I said before, this paddle here does not retain the bolt back. So that was a cause for concern, obviously, and they modified the mechanism rather sharpish. Essentially, all they did was make sure that the pin here went through the trigger, the rear of the trigger mechanism, so you can't push it down, at least as much. And they also beefed up the elements of the linkage for the grip safety. It still works the same way, still doesn't hold back the bolt, but in the rear, from the rear position. In fact, they make it sloped at the back, so it definitely doesn't hold anything back. So despite this redesign, these still had a reputation of occasionally running away, to the extent that I have an anecdote from someone who recalls their basic training with these, and the instructor just said, yeah, if it runs away, just keep it pointing that way until the mag runs out. There's a good fella. Yeek. Now despite that, they were still loved. You get very teary-eyed forums when you ask questions about these on French military forums. Anyway, how do you bring this into action? Well, let's put this in, say, if you were jumping, you would have your loaded mag, honest. Everything's folded up. Now the first thing you need to do is pull the stock out. Now this is simply because otherwise you cannot reach the grip and you cannot get the grip safety unless you have really tiny hands. So you'd extend first or second notch, then you would swing down the mag, cock the action, and away you go. Simple as that. Now, to the range. One thing I want to test that I've been told about is doing this.
Did they mag dump it like that or fire bursts?
They would burst it.
Right.
Just doesn't move. So I hope you learned something today and enjoyed yourselves, particularly the bit at the end. I certainly did. Can't wait to get out there again. So thank you for your support, whatever platform you choose. Thank you to our patrons, and I shall see you again down here in the workshop or out on the range as soon as we can. Bye.